So what is codependency? And I think it's, in part to start off, took this definition off the internet. It was the one I liked the best. There's tons of them. You can change. It says it's an emotional and behavioral condition. So it's two parts, emotional and behavioral condition that affects an individual's ability to have healthy, mutually satisfying relationships. Okay? And I think that that's an interesting, mutually satisfying relationships, because a lot of times the codependent will come in and they'll say that, well, I'd be okay if they would just do what I need them to do. And I think that's one of the themes you're going to see. Codependency, is a place that you start picking up, because I think what you would ask me to do is sort of give signs, at least how I see it, of how we can recognize these kinds of relationships, because they don't come in and say, "Hey, I'm codependent." You're gonna see things are gonna be well hidden under somebody. Codependence almost always IP. You know what IP is? Everybody knows what IP is. Almost always IP. The other person is the problem in the relationship. So they will not identify themselves as a codependent, and sometimes it is tricky because that other person in the relationship can look really bad functioning or really abusive, depending on how and why it comes in. So I think you have to understand mutually satisfying, because the other person in the relationship is usually not mutually satisfied. They're usually say things to me like, I can't even have a bad day, because if I have a bad day, my wife or my husband's having a bad day. I can't even do that, because if I'm upset, they're upset. And there's no differentiation of self, and it's a problem. It is also known as relationship addiction, okay? Because people with codependency often form and maintain relationships that are one-sided, emotionally destructive, and or abusive. Combination or individually, all of those things, okay? And I think that we just have to be aware, not everybody comes with, everything checked, right? There are different, I think, types of couples that we're going to come in, because you're going to see, obviously, codependency needs a couple. It could be a parent and a child, or child and a parent, those kinds of things, which are also dyad as well. But they won't come in with 100% everything. But you'll see addiction, right, component, they're drawn together, and we'll talk about that. Psychiatric, right, borderline, narcissistic, right, those two are very, very big. Histrionic as well. Those personality disorders attract a certain type, and if we look at it through an attachment perspective, right, I think that's really kind of the way to look at this. There's other things that we can look at, but I think attachment is a big one on this one. So we're going to look at it, I think from that, at least for this part, and then I'm going to probably talk a little bit more about therapeutic stuff, I think, towards the end of this 2 hours, or maybe the next one that we do have a little more time to prepare. But so one of the things that you're going to see that I've noticed within codependency is a difficult making decisions in a relationship. Codependents will be there and they'll tell you, what do you think I should do, right? They can't make a decision. They keep on complaining about their spouse, and then always making decisions for them. And then when they want to make a decision about divorce, they ask you what do you think they should do. Okay. Now that's usually, I think, a conglomeration of a lot of therapy. One of the things that I warn you is, and we'll talk about this in addictive relationships, that people will come in and I see this a lot in sex addiction type work, right? Where and it's usually around men. Men are usually around sex addiction. Women are usually around food. Again, not always, but that's the way it plays out in a bigger percentage. And they'll go to a therapist, and some of the things that people do when they have sexual addictions beyond porn and masturbation can be pretty socially unacceptable for a firm world or any world. And
like what?
Huh?
Like what?
I had a client come in who was acting out with transvestites and going to massage parlors and having unprotected sex. And the reason that he admitted to his wife this was happening is because she got itching, the genitals, and he thought that maybe he gave her something. And that's how the whole thing sort of blew up. But he was going to parks and other things and doing some really deviant, what we would consider deviant behavior. And
this is addictive behavior. How does it
fall
into codependency?
So I'll tell you in just a little bit. We'll get there. It'll go codependent, because those kind of people usually attract somebody who's very codependent. and stay with them. And what I'm saying is that you're gonna hear something like that, and what will happen is somebody will say, well, you need to leave him, right? And if you tell codependent to leave, they ain't leaving. Okay, it's got to be a process, and it's not I don't feel as a therapist, and I was told it's not my job to get people to leave relationships. It's my job to help them decide what they want to do. And so it's difficult making decisions in a relationship. Difficulty identifying feelings. So you want to move into this section? Before we move ahead, difficult identifying your feelings. Okay? Codependents have a terrible time identifying their feelings. They will come in and talk to you about whoever they are codependent with, and anytime you ask them when they have a situation complaining, usually what a codependent does, and you can pick this up in a relationship, we'll talk about it as we go forward, is they try and change another person's behavior to make them feel okay. And you'll hear lines like, if they would only do this, I would feel less stress. If that my son would get married, I could be happy. Okay? Now again, we had Jewish mothers, so there's a lot of Jewish mothers that want to see their sons. When it gets to a point where they're destroying relationships because they keep on talking to a person and not allowing them to be who they are, right? That's when it gets to be a emotionally destructive, abusive, one-sided relationship. They're trying to change people's behavior to make them feel more comfortable. Right? And one of the lines I use, you can write this down because I find it very effective, you don't have to, but it works for me, is a lot of what I'll do when I have somebody that I've already, and you can pick it up in about 5 or 10 minutes. Somebody that comes in that's codependent. Again, it's not always, but they'll be talking about that person. And whoever it is, whether it's their spouse, or let's just say their spouse, we'll keep it consistent. And I'll say, how does that make you feel? And then they'll talk about their spouse again. And I'll say, wow, so that sounds really, upsetting. What do you feel about that? And they'll talk about their spouse. And they'll just keep on doing it, and they'll keep on doing it. Now, I don't say anything the first session, okay? Because I really feel like a person, one, needs to unload, and I want to also kind of do as much intake as I can within that session. But after the first session, I'll let them go again, and I'll see, because maybe they just came in and needed to dump about it, and then they'll go back to the same pattern of talking about the spouse, and I'll say something about halfway through, and I'll say, we've been here now about an hour and a half, so that's about 90 minutes, maybe a little bit less. I said, through those 90 minutes, I keep on asking you how it makes you feel, and you keep on talking about your spouse. I said, how much do you think you've talked about yourself here? And I go, I don't know. And I go, about 3 minutes. And that kind of tunes them in to something's not right? And I mean, I won't be mean, I'll just state it because that's just the truth. And then they'll go on and they'll start actually talking maybe about themselves a little bit. Within a really short period of time, they'll be talking about their spouse again. It'll become a process of them catching themselves. And then you can just go, how does that, tell me about what you're feeling. When he does that or she does that, what's going on for you? And you'd be surprised how little access these type of people have to that inner experience and inner world. Again, asking self-questions. And sometimes we have to overfunction for people like that because they're like little children that have not learned to walk yet. So, I started saying, start off a sentence with, when my husband does this, it makes me, or my spouse does this, it makes me feel. And they will sit there and go, angry, okay? So now, anger is a second emotion. What's under the anger? And I will throw out words, and I will help them to start seeing what resonates with them. Because again, it's a process of really starting to access self. Difficult, yes, go ahead.
How do you do that successfully without leading the client?
I think I could lead them.
No, I'm not challenging you. I'm saying, can you enlighten me to what skills does one implement?
What do you mean by?
Meaning, if you're giving, very often I've seen, but again, my clients have usually been younger, that when you say certain words, like, oh yeah, that fits. Like you gave me something. So how do you avoid that trap so that you're getting an honest answer as opposed to they're trying to give you what they think you want to hear?
Okay, so it's a good question. So you're not sure in the beginning. But sometimes I'll ask people if they give me too many, oh yeah, that's it. Are you telling me that because I'm the greatest therapist in the world, or that's what's really resonating? And sometimes I'll look at you, well, no, because I want to make you happy. Oh, because you're the greatest therapist in the world. And I said, I really enjoy compliments, but that's not what we're here for. You know, like, let's talk about what's really going on for you, because I can't work if you're trying to please me, because now you're in another codependent relationship. And you know, we're here to get out of that. So why don't we talk about what's going on for you? Again, focus. Focus it back. Focus it back on that.
I
And
can
they
see
will do.
them being very frustrated with such questions.
They do sometimes.
You do it with the spouse in the room at the same time?
No. No. I mean, I will break people up, because usually in these kind of relationships, what ends up happening is they're adversarial, and so the spouse will use that against the person. You don't want that. It's not going to work. Difficulty, no problem. Difficulty communicating in relationships. If a person can't access self, what they're usually saying is, "You're doing this to me." You know, if you would do this, then I wouldn't feel this way. What are they doing? Well, they're doing this, right? No access to any kind of internal world of I'm feeling controlled, I'm feeling this, I'm feeling that. You know, so a person has no idea what they're doing other than they're doing something wrong. Okay?
Which person?
It depends. It can be one or the other or both. Usually, a codependent person, the code in the room will blame the other person for the way that they're feeling. Now, again, it can be exactly the opposite, where the other person will have a bad day and the other person will be so tuned into their feelings. There's a lot of different levels and things of codependency, and we'll talk about different how they manifest themselves. Again, there's no perfect formula for understanding these things. Go ahead, Lynn. You got another question? I can see your brain act.
I'm just like, you know, when people are in this codependent relationship, often they feel that they are, you know, trying really, really hard in this relationship to make it work and bending over backwards and all these things.
Right.
And they feel that the other person is just not responsive to it in any way. And
Usually don't feel. Usually they feel they can't tell you they feel something. They're just telling you they're angry. Usually the one feeling that comes up is anger.
they might be angry.
Okay.
They also might feel rejected. Is more likely.
I'm sure that if they can, yes, they would, but they can't identify that in the beginning.
Not sure about if they
Okay.
can't always. They just don't, but they don't understand why they're there.
That could be true. That could be it too.
Mindy?
Okay. Anybody got any other questions before, please?
I have something brewing. I'm not yet sure.
watching it.
If
Go
you,
ahead.
if you take the adversarial out for a minute, and you do keep both of them in the room, and you allow the spouse, or the husband, let's say, or the spouse, to hear what the wife is actually feeling, because she wouldn't have that opportunity to say it, or she doesn't yet know how to
Yes.
say it by herself, and you're helping her say those feelings, and then he's hearing it.
Yes.
When he's out the room, he's
It
not
could be the
hearing.
other way around too, that the husband can say what he wants to say to the wife as well. But yes, sometimes it. I'm just gonna, again, you guys know me. I'm a little bit like, you know, feel like I need to keep on the other side. There's a lot of really emotionally abused men. When we see people getting thrown down the steps and put into hospitals, that's usually one, because that's the high level physical
We were
abuse.
just talking
There's
about
a
that.
lot of emotional abuse. It's about, all the studies, the psychology today say it's about 50-50. Okay, so it's not, we're not here, and codependent relationships, again, I don't think we recognize them as well as we would recognize, a husband and wife as a thing. But sometimes I see guys being abused. They don't even know it. They just kind of talk like this, and you go, that sounds like really abusive. Like, what did that feel like to you? I don't know. They don't react the same way. You're shaking your head.
Yeah, because I saw a lot, but I didn't have one guy, Baruch Hashem, who photographed the bruises she gave him and went to the police, which was good. When later she called him for nothing, literally nothing, and tried to get him in trouble. And the police are like, yeah, it's obvious that she's not afraid of you, and she does horrible things to you, but we still have to put you in jail.
I hear you.
And I talked to a judge, the judge who
Wow.
comes here, Philip Marcus, and I was like, what do you do about this? And he said nothing, because sometimes the husband will kill the wife, So they don't take any chances. It doesn't, the
To
wife,
cover their,
unfortunately.
to cover their asses.
Yeah, exactly. When the wife calls and says he did something, it doesn't matter. if
It
it's
doesn't
true.
matter because they're scared.
Yeah, because they don't want her to die, so it's reasonable. That's what he said. It's a shame, but they don't want her to die,
And
so.
it's not always true either, but most of it is. Right? There are cases where women end up, we've seen some of them end up killing people or
It could be.
doing other things. You can ask John Bob.
Probably rare.
Just because men are usually
So
physically stronger.
to answer
Just
your
lost
question,
his weight, doesn't
to
he?
answer your question, going back, and I'm sorry, things I'm trying to keep focus is, I think if you can do the therapy with the couple, it is the most effective. Depending again, if it's reached a point of adversarial or whatever, I will split them up for some sessions to kind of get them to a point where I can bring them in. And a lot of times, what you hear, again, a very codependent thing is, what would that be when they're complaining? What would it be like to tell your spouse? And it happens almost 100%. They're not going to listen. What's the point, right? Again, and I'll say something like, well, who do you think needs to hear it? And I'll go, what do you mean? I said, who do you think needs to hear you say that? And they'll say, my husband? No. And they'll go, me? Yeah. Because that's part of what has to go on. They need to hear themselves, access self, access self, access self. That is the thing that you have to help this person do. Be able to act, and part of it is being able just to say it without expecting an effective change. Because why should I say it if they're not going to change? If I'm not going to get it. Now I forgot the line that I use a lot, which I think is really helpful. Somewhere 2, 3, 4 sessions in, when I want to join the person or I have already, I'll agree with them. I'll say, gosh, I really understand why, we'll use husband this time, why you're so angry at your husband. And they'll kind of stop for a second and say, I would be angry too if I gave all my, all the way I feel about myself over to somebody else and they won't do what I want. Right? And it's just like, and it just, you just hit them. And again, if they're there and you've got a good bond, they will work with you. If you do it, you don't even have to do it now. You just kind of do it like, wow, it seems to me like you're giving over the way you feel to another person, all that power, and they're not doing it. I'd be angry as heck too, because I have no control of the way I feel. Adam, did you have your hand up? And then we'll move forward.
No, I'm just trying to block that horrible light.
Which
Am I
light?
looking at?
I thought maybe you liked the woman next to you or something like that.
Which
Very
camera?
fun. You want him to pizza there? Just kidding. I get away with stuff nobody else gets away with in this place.
You know, who said you got away with it?
Okay, that's true too. They put me up here, it must have something. Valuing the approval of others more than valuing, approval of yourself. Again, it's simplistic, but it's on steroids with codependency. Okay? Lacking trust in yourself and having poor self-esteem. Again, the two really go together, but codependent people have no trust in their ability to identify their own feelings, and they're usually married to somebody who's gaslighting them. Not always, again, depending on many different types of couples, the way they interact. So,
Just some clarification
sure,
here.
clarify what.
Lacking trust in yourself and having poor self-esteem, that's specifically in regards to emotion, or that's in general in all forms of functioning?
Help me understand the question.
Meaning lacking trust in yourself in terms of abilities at work, in terms of scholastic abilities.
No. Only emotionally in the form of relationships. I mean,
Okay.
it can carry themselves out, but sometimes you will find outside of codependent relationships, some people can be highly functional.
Okay, thank you. I'm trying to understand what you meant by that.
Any other questions? I'm bowling you guys over, all right, so fine. All right. Childhood trauma is often a root of codependency, okay? Again,
And we talked
childhood
about
trauma,
attachment.
say again?
Can you talk more about attachment?
Yeah, I will.
That's
See,
underneath.
it's coming afterwards, Lena, look at the sheet.
I know, but
I'm-
trauma, attachment, can you
Yeah, we're gonna go there, I promise. I just wanna talk about childhood trauma. Now, again, trauma itself, right, is the root of most of our stuff. Let me rephrase. Is the root of a lot of dysfunction in people. It doesn't always lead to codependent relationships, okay? The same as attachment, okay? It leads, to other types of dysfunction. But we see that these kinds of things we can identify. Sometimes people go through with highly functional families and they have some sort of dysfunction, and we can't pinpoint it a family of origin. Almost all the time, in my experience, again, and I, look at studies, you can almost pinpoint these things to certain types of attachment-related issues.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're squinting, did you?
No,
Okay.
listening, thinking.
Okay, that's fine. I'm just looking. I look at everybody.
They probably don't want to investigate that childhood place also. Okay, so.
It's sometimes hard, again, depending on where the person is. They don't really want to look at themselves. If they come in individually, right, they can look at themselves, okay, because they're there for a particular reason. If they're coming in as part of a couple, there's a good chance they do not want to look at that part because the other person is usually the issue. They're usually IPing the other person. I think as we go down now, we're going to talk about neglect, abuse, divorce. There's many others, but when we look at attachment theory, which I think is a real important one, we're going to look at two types of attachments. Okay, individuals high in anxious attachment. There's two different types of attachments. All of you been through attachment.
There's a few different types of
There's a lot of them, but the two main ones we're going to talk about, right, are anxious, avoidant, and anxious, ambivalent. Okay, so those are the two along the spectrum. We've got disorganized, which is borderline. I'll touch on those a little bit. I'm not an attachment expert, so I don't really. There's maybe some people here that have more experience than I do, but I'm going to read this because I just like it. Individuals high in anxious attachments are more likely to engage in emotional manipulation and other harmful behaviors intended to prevent a partner from leaving the relationship, which in turn is linked to reduced relationship satisfaction. So manipulation, right, and control usually do not play out in a mutually satisfying relationship. So let's talk about, I was really expecting more questions here, guys, so kind of hit me if you got them.
Well, the concept, but
Why don't you ask them?
because I want to see what, I don't want to stop in the middle and there's so many.
Sure, that's for sure.
Okay. So I think the two that I see that attract, I'm amazed, okay? I talk to my supervisor sometimes about this, how narcissists find their equal partners, right? When I say equal, meaning the fit, how borderlines find their equal partners, right? Borderlines have a tendency, not always, a tendency to be female. Narcissists have a tendency to be men. How these people find the person that fits in with them. I'll start with borderline. I don't know why I didn't put that first. Borderlines, right, have a tendency to find people men who have mesh relationships with their mothers. Okay? Not always. Could be a mesh relationship with a father, but I've seen this on numbers and numbers and numbers of occasions. And why would that be? Okay? Also, too, people with anxious, ambivalent attachments. Does everybody know what an anxious ambivalent is? I get them confused.
You should explain.
Okay, so you have two types of, again, there's so many that have been now done since Bowlby and Ainsworth, but the two that the way I see it in simplest form is you've got anxious avoidant and anxious ambivalent, okay? Anxious avoidant comes usually from childhood neglect, meaning a child, right, attachment theory-wise, cries and cries and cries. You have a mother or father, caregiver that's, let's say, an addict, and they don't get up. The kid cries, and they don't get anybody coming to them, okay, which is how we kind of gauge attachment theory, and they stop, and they become very, very self-reliant, right? Those are the people that walk into a room, and it comes off like they don't need anybody. They come off many times very self-assured, very reassured, even though sometimes they're not, because they won't depend on anybody. Those people have a tendency to be the persons that turn out to be narcissistic, okay? Those people will,
Why?
huh?
Why?
Because they're self-absorbed. Narcissism
They're
is self-absorption.
self-absorbed.
Self-absorbed.
They don't see another person.
They don't see another person. They don't depend on another
But
person.
here they don't depend, but why?
Well,
do
they actually
harm
depend on
somebody
another
else?
person, just in a really unhealthy way. Go
I
ahead.
understand, but like I've seen narcissists understand like hurting other people.
No, it depends on,
So hold tight, because I'll give the other one. So
Depends on-
anxious
it's also-
ambivalent usually develops from a parent that's either abusive or bipolar. It comes from what's called inconsistent parenting. Okay? By inconsistent is one day you have one parent and the next day you have a different parent. So you walk into the room one day and you say, "Hi, Ima," "Hi, Abba," and then they say, "Hi, son," and things, and you come in and everything's great. The next day it's, "Hi, Ima," bang, 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 or "Hi, Abba," bang, bang, bang. You got a parent that's an addict, right? So they come off, they're hungover one day and the kid gets beat up. And a person becomes, it makes a lot of sense. They become very highly aware of other people's reactions, other people's moods. Those are the people kind of look and go, "Adam, I see you shaking your head. Are you okay? Am I doing anything wrong?" They pick up things, right? They're very, 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 very tuned in. Thank you so much. Tuned into other people's reactions, right? And those types of people attract or are attracted to borderline or narcissistic, because those are the only ones that fit. Two narcissists are not going to marry each other. Two borderlines are not going to marry each other.
Let me guys, which one of the two
I am
worse?
not sure two narcissists will not marry each other.
Okay, so tell me how.
They do.
Pretty interesting.
Can you imagine Donald Trump marrying Donald Trump?
No, they're different types of narcissism. Maybe they can definitely marry each other
Okay.
because they could be a good marriage.
Okay.
It's easy to get married. It's hard to stay married.
They might, yeah.
Okay, you're talking about.
Anyone can get married.
Hold on. What you just said is honest, because you're right. They can get married, but they won't stay married. The marriages that stay together, the long-term codependency, are narcissists with anxious ability. Okay? Because those are the only people who would stay in the relationship. You get a borderline and a narcissist marrying each other, for some reason they can do that, they're not going to stay there. They're not going to stay together. Again, you can point out, yes, I got a couple, 20 years ago there was one. These things happen. Okay? Go ahead.
Why don't they? He doesn't. Assuming the man is the narcissist and the female is the borderline, with this example, he doesn't pay attention to her, so he doesn't care, and she wants to play the victim. So, why? That seems like the perfect.
And when she starts to try and manipulate him, he's gonna be manipulated. Probably not.
Right, and therefore she gets the feeling goes to the victim again.
Could be. Again, I would tell you these people could get married. Has anybody ever had a client that was a couple that was a narcissist married to a borderline? That's a long-term marriage.
They stay together for a long time. Sure.
You've had them.
Yeah,
Okay.
sure.
I
They don't
haven't.
split up.
Anybody else?
They don't necessarily split up.
Okay. Anybody?
They might not be happy, but they don't necessarily
Does-
split up because there's
does-
something holding them
Does
together.
anybody else have a couple like that?
Maybe they all go to Lena, so.
I want to know what are these terms anxious and ambivalent? What does that refer to? Ambivalent. So it's avoidant.
Okay, so within attachment theory, there are two types of attachments categories.
There's a few types.
Hold tight. I got it. You got secure and insecure.
Yeah.
Okay. Within secure attachments, right? You have, and none of these things are 100% secure and 100% insecure, right? You've got secure attachments, and then within the category of insecure attachments, the two main ones are anxious ambivalent and anxious avoidant. Okay. And they're categories. Now you've got other terms they use: disorganized attachment, which usually talks about borderline or personality disorders. So there's a lot more, but I'm trying to keep it simple.
How does anxious and ambivalent correlate with inconsistent parenting? What is ambivalent?
Ambivalent, again, the word is a little bit
Who's
confusing.
anxious about that?
Well, again, these are terms that Bowlby and Ainsworth sort of came up with.
That's a good idea.
It refers to that person who has inconsistent parenting, even though it's not.
A person with inconsistent parenting, like meaning abuse, that would come in and one day would get beaten up for the same thing that they, got love for the next time, is going to be highly tuned in to that parenting.
It could just be a parent that also disappeared because of illness or something, depending on the developmental stage.
That's not ambivalent, it's the opposite of ambivalent.
Okay.
That could put them at highly
You're
aware.
getting too much into the ambivalence
I
of
don't know why
it. You're
we-
just
You're describing
understanding
it as unpredictable.
Huh?
You're describing it as unpredictable.
Correct.
Yeah,
Unpredictable.
something
So
happens.
unpredictable doesn't necessarily mean that they're about personality disorders, like Lena said.
Did I say that?
No.
I mean, saying that they don't have a personality disorder. What I'm saying is that an anxious ambivalent attachment will develop from somebody that can't be. What's the word you used again?
You can't rely on it.
Unpredictable.
Correct.
You don't know where you stand.
Children feel secure when they have parents who are predictable. They want to know when they cross a line, that's what's going to happen. And you know, predictable parenting is one of the things that, if you, again, not for a different time, is what creates security in children. When you
That's
have
true.
inconsistent parenting or unpredictable parenting, it creates a lot of insecurity in a child, and they find ways to help to adapt to that. One of them is to become highly aware of the parent, and which translates into, as they go out into the world, other people.
What attracts these two people together? The borderlines with these tuned in people, what do they gain by it? What are they attracted to?
I mean, people
What are they
that are
looking
usually
for?
enmeshed with their mother are usually caretakers. Okay?
Why are they attracted to them?
Huh?
Why are they attracted? Why is a borderline attracted to an enmeshed?
To a narcissist.
To an enmeshed?
Well, not to a narcissist. I mean, I have never had a borderline attracted to a narcissist.
A narcissist is, but they end up together.
I would say it's not my experience. Now, again, it might be yours, but it's not mine.
You've said that. You just said
No,
that
I
here.
said borderlines attract people with ambivalent attachments. Read down both narcissist personality and borderlines are usually set up with somebody who's got an ambivalent
What do you mean by
attachments.
ambivalent?
Huh?
What do you mean by ambivalent?
In attachment theory,
Yeah.
you have anxious ambivalent and anxious avoidant.
Right, as ambivalent.
Ambivalent is somebody who is very tuned in to the partner that they're with, and they're looking at reactions. They're looking at their facial expressions. The person has a bad day. They have a bad day. Like, you know, come in and say, "Mindy, I can see you're looking at me like that. Are you okay? Like, did I do something? Did I say something?" They're very tuned into those kinds of things. Where somebody with an anxious avoidant wouldn't even notice you.
But Gershon, you've said a lot in the past that narcissists and borderline connect and become couples. Like you've said that
No,
all.
I don't think I said that, but if you did, if that's what you picked up. I think narcissists
Maybe I missed it.
Narcissists have a tendency to marry women with ambivalent attachments. Borderlines have a tendency to marry men with ambivalent attachments.
I'll just change it. No problem.
Dear-
How does it help them in life? Kind of, why is it?
Well,
Why is it borderline?
Did you want to be
attached?
married to somebody who's narcissist?
Nobody would like.
Well, that's not true. I mean, some people are attracted to it.
I
Because they
understand, but
have
why is a borderline attracted after that?
to somebody with an ambivalent. Well, I would say probably why is an ambivalent
Do you know that
attracted to it?
narcissists are very appealing? They're charming. They're
Correct.
charismatic. They fill up space. You don't know they're narcissists when you meet them.
They have techniques.
They love
have
bomb
tools.
you.
Okay.
They are very good
like
at
the girl goes
getting
to
you
the
into
guy's
a relationship.
Right.
Right.
It could take a long time.
There's a term which I
No, but
put
I'm
down.
asking the other way around. I'm asking what does a borderline get out of this enmeshed person who's
Somebody that
enmeshed?
stays with them and they can beat up and they can manipulate.
Security.
Why the borderline
Borderlines.
is dependent on.
Borderline's biggest fear is rejection.
Correct. And I would tell you somebody that's enmeshed with their mother that's got an ambivalent attachment ain't leaving. It's crazy. I mean, I'll go on and do it.
So you rely
Yeah.
on them not
Correct.
rejecting them.
Mhm. You marry somebody with a secure attachment and you start acting borderline, you know, doing what borderlines do, people leave. And you see that a lot from world. I mean, people get married and they learn about the person, and the people who have secure attachments have a tendency to get out. Now, not everybody has a personality disorder, whatever. People get married for the wrong reasons and things happen, but those are a lot of the marriages, you know. Now, narcissists, if you look at what I put down, you might have heard the term love bombing. Okay,
Yeah.
it's a
Just
new,
talked
Just-
about.
just-
it's a new term, right? New love bombing. You'll hear, you know, the things is that's what narcissists do. They are very appealing. They'll come into
They're
somebody who's got
extremely
tremendously low
appealing.
self-esteem, and they'll love bomb them. They'll fall in love with them quickly. They'll
And
take
then
them out
they'll,
to places.
but then they'll discard them,
Well, of course, but that.
and then they'll do it again, and
Again.
again, and again, and again.
Well, that or they will marry this person, and they'll create this very unhealthy dynamic between the two of them.
Every case of Yad L'Achim is that. It's the Arab that plays nice, gives flowers and
Right.
whatever. And then once she's in the village, that's it.
Human trafficking as well.
Yeah.
Yes,
Correct.
it's all like that.
Same thing.
But when
Same
people
thing.
are vulnerable to that.
bombing, no pun intended.
Any questions?
Very true.
Well, let's see
If you
how
have
it
any
plays
questions, you
itself
can
out.
disagree
Wait,
with me,
wait,
it's
wait.
okay.
No, let's see how it plays
Besides
itself out.
Lena, is there anybody else that disagrees with me?
I didn't catch what you said. You were saying that the easier the long-term marriage might be a narcissist with who? The narcissist?
Somebody with an ambivalent avoidant attachment, or avoidant ambivalent.
What about schizoid?
Does everybody
What do you
know-
mean about a schizoid narcissistic relationship? That's all the
Way
same.
more
That's
technical
much
than,
more,
than things. I'm trying to keep it real
Okay,
simple.
fine.
Again, attachment theory. Bowlby and Ainsworth created the mysterious stranger that comes in. They watch how a child reacts,
Yeah,
right?
it's very
The
interesting.
child, and again, I'm not gonna go so much into it. You guys are all familiar with that a little bit, right? So, different attachment styles are created by primary caregivers, okay? I'm breaking it down there with codependency. There's lots of other factors, but this, I think, is a really, really, like, primary one. Somebody that comes in that has an anxious, ambivalent style is going to be very tuned into the partner. They are going to attract somebody, right? And you know, they're going to attract somebody, or they're going to be attracted to somebody that can give them that self-esteem, that give them that place in the beginning, and then they start playing a very healthy, unhealthy dynamic out. Okay, Howard, you got anything, questions? You can say, you can disagree with me. I mean,
No, actually, I think you're good. You're doing a good job.
Thank
But
you, Howard.
as long
You can
as you're
speak more than.
as long as you're reflecting, how would you classify Trump, which everybody knows, and it's easy to sit and look at it because everybody appears to know who he is, who his wife is, and we recognize that Trump is a narcissist.
You think?
Yeah. So, what would we look at his wife as being? Go ahead.
I got no idea how he pulled it off. Yeah.
Green card.
You know, first of all, it's really hard to like look at Melania and know like things because we don't see her that much.
Right.
Okay, so
And
do
you,
you
you,
think
We
you
don't
think
see the
that's
natural. You don't see the natural.
We also have no idea what happens actually between the children.
correct?
No,
We
we
only-
just surmise.
We're just
That's it.
guessing, but we really do not know.
No. Why don't we focus back to the
Yeah.
subject? I want to
Thank
see
you,
how it
Doug.
plays
Keep us
itself under
focused, man. Keep us
codependency.
focused.
No, it's like an impossible situation.
Yeah,
A
it's
narcissist with a very needy person, you're not going to break them up. Who are you going to take
Well,
care
of course, okay. So I mean, why do you try? I mean, again, you're not trying to. They come in.
Yeah. How do you change something like that?
Well, I
Would you
mean, we
work
as
on the-
therapists don't try and change things. We try and help people to affect change themselves.
All right, they're not,
Awareness.
Yeah, but they're so tied into each other. Like
They are. They are tied into each other, and it takes a long time for them to either untie, and that usually means a divorce by the anxious
The
ability.
narcissist, I assume the narcissist.
Or the narcissist.
Can a
that they feel
narcissist
like-
ever cure himself? Kind of change?
A narcissist? No.
Never.
A narcissist is not self-aware. No, they're not self-aware.
And a
They do.
borderline?
Borderline is much more self-aware.
And can
You
change?
think?
Yes.
I would say a narcissist is
I
usually
do,
self-aware.
no, I do not believe narcissists are self-aware. That's one of the definitions of them. Thank
Well,
you.
any personality disorder.
Yeah, they're not. Borderlines are because they're more aware of what's going on inside of them. Narcissists, that's one of the things. They're
Okay, I
just
want to
really
say as
not.
well that personality disorders are like
Are very
anything else.
difficult, but they're on a
Like,
spectrum.
can we have guys? Can we like?
No.
It just makes it easier for me to think. Personality disorders are not 100-0. There are people who are more narcissistic than others, right? Again, the reason I mentioned Trump is because he's like the picture of narcissistic personality disorder. Just the way he answers questions, the way he views life. Not everybody who's, and first of all, too, not every narcissist is narcissistic personality. Again, not everybody, it's probably going to be controversial, not everybody that molests somebody is a pedophile. Pedophilia is a personality disorder, it's about a DSM. People can do it. Not everybody that kills somebody is a serial killer or pathological. So, people could be narcissistic. A lot of guys
Or
on
have
Wall Street are narcissistic.
Narcissistic tendencies.
They have narcissistic tendencies, borderline tendencies. They also attract these kinds of people. At their height, you're looking at when you have a personality disorder, it's on steroids. So, okay. So love bombing, it's like a thing that a narcissist will do, okay? It'll come into a relationship, you'll ask, how do you get in? Oh, they were so nice to me, as you said, they gave me flowers, I felt good, I felt really good about myself. They pull a person in, right? And you hear this with abusers, like people physically abusive is they'll do it and then they'll snap and then they'll beat somebody up and they won't do it. The marriage will go good for a while, and over the course of time, a person ends up losing behavior because they lose themselves. Right? Sometimes codependent relationships develop, and so we'll talk about some of those. Okay, I think within man, I got a lot more to do. We need some questions, guys. Anybody else got any questions?
You're referring to the cycle of abuse right now.
I only had a few minutes to prepare this, so I figured with this group I would not even get halfway through with all the questions. You guys are killing me.
Just say more controversial things.
No, and then why would a narcissist who's getting everything he wants from somebody who is so empty want to destroy her afterwards?
What do you mean want to destroy her afterwards?
Abuse him.
Something better.
What? I don't know.
You're saying that she'll give the love bombing, then he'll abuse her.
Yes.
The love bombing is
What does he get? He's getting everything he wants. Why would he?
Why does he
Because
abuse?
he's not really.
What does he need?
He's using
Yeah,
because that's a codependent relationship. He's not interested in that.
Well, I understand that love bombing is together.
Yeah, there's love
He
bombing,
doesn't
versus and discard.
need to work anymore, kind of. So
And also it's uncomfortable for a narcissist
again.
to be connected to somebody is very uncomfortable for them. You see this in pursuer distancer. You and I have talked about this. You see this a lot, not necessarily codependent relationships, but you'll see this in especially young couples, especially more along the Shiv-Javel Hasidisha, where they're very separate. Guy and girl, they get married and they connect, and then the guy usually, not always, but usually needs to pull away a little bit because all the closeness is becoming uncomfortable for him, and the woman will do this and he'll do this, right? And next thing you know, they're in therapy and she's yelling at him because he won't be close to her. And I'll have to say, help me understand how yelling at your husband wants him to be close, closer. I don't know, that's I don't know what else to do. And so what, the thing to do in these kind of relationships, again, not codependent, but I think it's important, is when the pursuer does this and the distancer does this, pursuer has to go like this and let the distancer do this, and then not when the distancer does this go, because that also what happens in codependent relationships that are more is that the pursuer, usually the codependent that's ambivalently attached, and will do this. The distancer will do this. At some point, they may come like this, and it's and they get overwhelmed. And then it just becomes a place where you get a lot of yelling and screaming, and a person just sort of detaches from the relationship. Again, it's not always narcissist. I just wanted to say that point. That's the psychological or psychiatric part. Go ahead, Ed.
I just wanted to speak to Joe's question. I think narcissists never really have what they want. In other words, it sounds like once you captured your person and now you're fine, but there's always things they want to do, and then the partner always has to go along with that. Does that fit? Because they're not done. It's like, in other words, if you're in war, you capture your prisoner and you're done. Okay, you have them, they're behind you.
Then there's demands from the weak one. Spend your time with me.
Right, yeah, so they're not finished, they're never finished.
I wanted it's a funny question, but why would you want to take clients like this? I just trying to understand for myself.
They come.
Because there is so little satisfaction working with these people.
Yeah, you're right.
I had, I don't know, 4
They
whatever
come.
that I could identify.
Usually
Is-
what happens,
And you are the only one that gets hurt at the end.
you're right. They're very difficult.
They go on with their life, killing each other, and they're happy. You're the one that they kill.
You're right. So
You try to break them up and not break them up in divorce, but
Hopefully
call
after-
a spade, and they don't want to do that.
Hopefully after this talk, you will have the tools to recognize these things right away, and then you can say,
Oh,
there's a
they're
lady that
cool.
works here named Lena Shore. She likes
You have to understand, why are they triggering you? There's something they're doing to you.
I feel
They're doing something.
impotent in a way, impotent.
They are doing something to you.
work through them, and it's such a lack of Hakara Satov for everything that
Oh,
you
yeah, of course they do.
Okay.
You
Look
have
at
no
that.
Hakara Satov for what you do.
Why should you expect it?
So let me go on a little bit too.
Why do you
I-
need
I-
a Karsatov from your clients?
I wanted to start off with borderline narcissistic personality. There are other codependent relationships.
Codependent.
You have addiction, right? Another form of highly codependent relationships.
Oh, yes.
And I think we'll talk about those because they'll be a little bit less controversial and maybe easier to understand. And I will talk about, I did these names and now I tried to hide the names and now I gotta remember who was. Okay, Eric was. Okay.
Code names.
Code names, but I can't remember the code anymore.
Right.
Okay, so this particular couple came in, and we'll talk about like how I see these things. Again, anybody else that's got some experience with this, please come in. I don't know everything, so you know, and I could you know, I don't mind people disagreeing or even challenging. Addiction, again, it's one of those things that I find pretty amazing. You will find there is a genetic component to addiction. Women who grew up with a father who was an addict, 8 times more likely to marry somebody with an addiction.
Wow.
With
Okay?
an
It's just the way it
Specifically drug
is.
or alcohol or other addictions as well?
I mean, again, drugs, alcohol, gambling, that, you know, you can even see sometimes when you do family systems work, within a genogram, you can see hoarding, you can see OCD, you know, different types of addictive behaviors, but people, you know, they end up marrying men with an addiction.
Is
And
that
you-
because that's a relationship they understand,
You
they
marry what you-
understand, that they
You
know?
marry what you know is.
Or as well, is it also because they have a need to save the person?
Yes,
Both of them, yeah.
yes,
Okay.
and other things too. I would say again, in my experience
That part of
with
the
these
model.
couples, huh?
It's got to do with Imago also.
Mm-hmm.
Imago.
Yes, sure.
You marry what you
I mean,
convict.
Hendrix is a great model. That if you have something that's unresolved with your parents, then, you know, you marry that person and you play it till it's fixed. Yes, okay, that's part of it. Also, too, you know, I've had couples come in where they have gotten married and, you know, they go home for the first time. You know, they're here for Shana Rishona. They go home for, let's say,
Oh,
Pesach.
that's a good
And
one.
they'll come back. And one or the other will say, it says, you know, your parents speak very abusively to you. Now, again, this has nothing to do with codependency, but people don't even realize when you grow up in a family system, that's all you know. And if your parents are talking terrible to you, right, you don't know any different until somebody says, you know, the way your mother or father speaks to you is just really not like that. No, really, because that's, you know. Now, those 10 people will tend to, once they go out with somebody who's also abusive, they're not going to, you know, somebody calls you and says, you know, you're ugly and you smell bad, you probably wouldn't go out a second time, right? But others say, oh, okay, you know, and it just brushes off. They don't even hear those things because there's a way of adapting to survive, right? In resiliency, people stop feeling those things because it's far too painful for a child to be called. You know, there was one couple where they used to call them. They were Spanish. They called them El Stupido. Their kids. And then, you know, you're thinking about like that's a kid that's going to need therapy in a little bit, you know, and they, like. But if you get called El Stupido for your whole
The
life,
stupid kid thing.
correct,
Yeah,
you're not gonna realize like that's an abusive behavior. You're gonna call somebody that's really critical to you, and you're gonna be like, okay. And so we you know, people marry. When somebody comes in, and I have talked to again women more than men in
That's
this,
interesting.
and they will say, like, did you know your husband? Because they never took a drink. They couldn't stand. They swore they were never going to marry an alcoholic, and they married. And said, well, did you not see this person? Oh, yeah, a couple of drinks. Okay, so who has a couple of drinks on a first date, right? But if you're married to an alcoholic, well, that seems like reasonable.
Wow.
So you never
Only
pick those
three,
things
not
up.
three.
Yes.
You never had a client who really only picked it up after they were married a few years?
Picked what up? It.
Well, okay, let's say their parent was an addict, and then their spouse ended up being an addict.
Sure.
From the beginning, seemed pretty normal and really.
So the answer is
I think
yes.
so.
Okay, and this is where I get amazed in this stuff, because first of all, addiction is what's the word, progressive. Yeah,
Mhm.
thank you. So it's progressive, and so a lot of times when you have young couples, right, they'll meet somebody who's not
early
really,
stages.
go ahead.
Early stages.
Also,
Yeah,
with the
they're in
stress
early
level, it
stages.
depends.
And also too, they're very good at covering things up with a double run.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, at some level, 2
She's
years
not
down the road, when
it's
they're,
attracted to that kind of guy that will be tomorrow.
or, yeah, and,
Right, that's what I'm curious
Amazing.
about. They're attracted to the person that will become the addict, but
well, or
what
the
is in
personality
there?
traits of the addict, which is, you know, people, you know, if you have some experience in addiction, or like me, you have, you know, addiction, you know, start to realize that people with addictions have certain personality and character traits that are just real different, right? And they react differently, and they view life differently, and things, and people are attracted to those things, even if the addiction isn't present. Again, it's like when I said this
energies,
earlier,
what is
Like
it?
it's an energy. I'm gonna, yeah, I'll give you an example
Personality.
in my own life, okay? I've been sober, you don't know, but 31 years, okay? And I went, thank you so much. I feel like I'm in an AA meeting. My name's Gershon, I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, Gershon.
And this is a true story, and it's absolutely amazing to me. But when I got sober, right, so I had lots of relationships, and I got religious too, but that's a whole other story. It didn't work so well. But anyway, not going there. Anyhow, I had spent about a year, maybe a little bit less, without a relationship, because that's what they say in AA. You should go a year without a relationship, just because they can be addictive and you focus on yourself. And I at some point decided I needed a girlfriend, and I was driving to a singles event in Atlanta, and it was supposed to be at a Jilly's restaurant. Well, there's 2 Jilly's restaurants, and the one we normally had was in Roswell. You don't know any of these things, but it was in town, which is about 20 minutes from my house. But they had actually moved it this time to Marietta, which was an hour or so with traffic. So I go to this Jilly's, there's nobody there. I'm desperate to find a girlfriend, right? And I get in my car after I figure this out. I'm already late. I'm driving up, I'm like, I got snot coming out of my nose, and I'm just so angry. I'm pounding the thing. I'm really nuts, you know? And I walk into this other Jilly's, and I'm like, I know some of you haven't seen this movie. There's a movie called The Terminator with Arnold Schwarzenegger. And then bang, I see some girl across the room, right? Walk over, chat her up, right? Within a week, we're traveling someplace on, you know, take a trip, right? Go on our first date. I'm talking a little spiritual stuff because I'm in AA like 6 months, and I'm, you know, and she says, wow, you sound like you're from a 12-step program. I said, how do you know that? She goes, my father's an alcoholic.
Wow.
And
Got it.
now, how does that happen? And it's not an unusual story.
It's subconscious, you know. It's so
I can't tell you what it is,
Subconscious,
yeah.
because things,
But that's
I can
unusual
tell
because
you
she's
if you
focusing
walk into an
too
AA
much.
meeting or an Al-Anon meeting,
Definitely
and
subconscious.
you talk to these people, they go, oh yeah, I just picked it.
Well,
There was
she didn't keep
50
it
guys, and I
subconscious.
picked him out of the room. There's 50
That's
women,
one of the
you pick
things
them
that
out.
Hendricks talks about, that you pick up subconsciously very, very
Yeah.
quickly.
But
Who's
she
going to
didn't-
help you?
She didn't keep it in the subconscious. It came out straight
It
away.
will come out
They say-
afterwards.
No, it usually comes out
Why?
10 years later. It
No,
came out
no,
5
no,
months
no,
later.
Okay,
it
guys,
doesn't
guys,
take
we're
10
losing it.
years. It
Stop.
does not
Okay,
take 10.
guys,
Doesn't
I'm in charge today.
On a similar vein, they say that the sexual abusers of children could walk into a room and say which of the kids that have already been.
100%. Pedophiles have
Right
a
away.
highly developed, again, I want to kind of stop because this gets real controversial, but again, not, the studies and all things, a highly developed sense of which children are the ones that they can
Which are the easiest victims.
frightening how they have a sense of it, right?
They do.
So, and
They
also,
read their body language a lot.
body language, whatever, it's frightening. And I would tell you that people with addictions have a tendency to, you know, to find that missing piece over and over again. I mean, I have clients, you know, this one, now I know who it is, Eric and Cindy. They met at 14 years old, okay? And you can, you know, you look at trauma bonds, but, you know, he
That's
was already
14,
when
yeah.
she met him, he was already in rehab once,
Wow.
at 14. She had a mother with narcissistic personality, so we don't say women, but mom had narcissistic histrionic, I don't know, maybe mom was. But, you know, this is development, classic ambivalent attachment, bang, right?
Bang.
Together 14, right? Still together today, but came in a really, really dysfunctional place. He had already, you know, smoked up and drank up all their money, and she was not functional in bed, postpartum a number of times. And thank God now they're doing really, really well. But it's, you know, these kinds of people attract each other. Any other questions? that answer your question? Yeah. I mean, it's just, I can't explain it, but I know it's there. It's like, it's just, I wish I had a more scientific place and I could point to some studies, but I
It's
can tell you that.
intuition that is beyond the
I can tell
study.
you another story that I heard from a lady from an Al-Anon meeting. She told it to me firsthand. And I saw her, she was new. We had an AA meeting and then there was an Al-Anon meeting with things. And I don't know, went outside for a second and I bumped into her and I said, "Oh, you're new." She was looking for an Al-Anon meeting, so it's in here. And I don't know, for some reason we struck up a conversation. And I said, "So, tell me a little bit about your story," because I was interested. And she said, "My father was an alcoholic. And my father was a terrible father, beat me, whatever, and I swore I would never marry, I'd never drink." She said, to this day, and she was in her 40s, she said, "Never drank." She said, "At 17 years old, I married somebody to get out of the house. Who did I marry?
An alcoholic.
I swore I was never gonna marry. I threatened to leave him till he drank himself to death in our middle to late 20s, right? Drank himself. You need to do a lot of drinking to kill yourself
At that age.
at that age, okay? It just, you gotta really work hard at killing yourself, okay?
Yeah.
But she threatened to leave, never left, right?
Never leaves.
Died, married another alcoholic. Okay? Again, these are stories that I tell you that are not unusual if you go in the States, especially where there's a lot of people within these programs. Threatened to leave him, drank himself to death by middle to late 30s, okay? Married another guy, right?
That guy.
Married a third guy. Hold on, Harry, just one second. Married a third guy, threatened to leave him, another alcoholic, by the way. Okay? Woman swore never gonna, threatened to leave him, told him if he didn't get sober. He went to AA and got sober. Guess what happened?
She left.
She left. She's saying a serious hard thing, and this is not a story where you just start taking your head going, no. This is a story that you hear, not all the time, but it's not surprising. She married a fourth guy, right? She left the guy. She married a fourth guy who was also an alcoholic, and she looked at me and she said, and that's when I sort of decided that maybe the problem wasn't with the men.
Yeah, she's the addict.
Right, and that's why that brought her to Al-Anon. Finally, after the third one,
Codependent
like fourth one, right, codependent relations. Like all of a sudden, it's like, and this is, I would say, Hendrix, right, trying to have an unresolved conflict with a parent, also attachment styles and things that connect. So these are things you hear.
And
Howard, go ahead.
Yeah, but that's what you described, which is great. It's what they know.
Correct.
And
I know.
sometimes
We
we
are
forget.
attracted to what we know.
That's, that's how they grew up. And that's what, it's not that they're attracted to,
It's just
that's
something
what they know.
Agreed.
So they go to something they know. And it's like that one you just spoke about, who was married 3 or 4 times to also an alcoholic. It's what she felt comfortable with. Now, it's similar to the child of a cop who says, I don't ever want to be a cop.
Right.
Or I don't want anything to do with
I
that.
don't want to ever marry a cop.
Right. And what do they marry?
A cop.
Cops. And they know exactly what's going on and what to do, and therein lies the problem.
Sure. I agreed 100%. I mean, a lot of it is just that. Yes, Deb.
I don't know if you're planning to do it, but it would be great if you could go through your therapy. Like, is there a structure of how to work with them? Like, step one, what's the process of dealing
Okay, so
with
in
this?
addictive couples, the first thing you gotta do is get the non-addict spouse. First of all, I'll tell you, in the way I work, which may not be the way everybody works, is I will work with the non-addict spouse, okay, at some level, because until you get the enabler, right, the second couple, Robert and Ann, okay, so they were a couple I just had not too long ago, was
the
not.
non-addict and non-codependent?
Huh?
You mean the non-codependent?
No,
do you mean by the
well,
non-enabler?
usually the enabler, which is the codependent.
The codependent, which is the.
They usually are both, there is a level of codependency on both sides, okay? So that plays out.
Do you know
I-
the classic story? The classic story is the alcoholic comes home, lies on the couch, and says, "Call my boss." And she picks up the phone and calls the boss again and says, "John's got the flu again."
Right.
And if John suddenly gets better, the wife doesn't know what to do with herself. This is all she knows how to do, is to
Sure.
keep saving John.
Yes,
And
his
if
wife
you're-
calls to make an
That's the whole key.
appointment for therapy for her husband.
Correct. And when somebody does that, and I get
Okay.
a lot of wives usually calling
I often
and
call
things, and I'll say,
first.
"Is your husband know you're calling?" "No, but I want him to talk to you." So give him my number and tell him to call. I won't even play that game. If somebody calls and says they're
If
trying to
they
set
won't
up
come see you.
things, trust me, it's like not, you want to
just-
help, we're a helping profession, but you're not
Don't
helping,
do that.
enabling the system,
But
right?
she's calling for the couple, for herself as well.
No, she's
No,
calling.
calling for the husband. My husband
calling
needs
for-
My
help.
husband needs therapy.
My husband needs help, save him.
What about the other way around?
What's that?
My husband calling, have you got any spots for my wife?
No.
I've had that.
No, I do exactly the same.
What do you do? Do you take the call? or
We
you tell
always try to get the spouse or the partner to call themselves, usually.
Okay.
I want to know the step that.
Okay, so the steps are, when I get a couple up to, it's like Robert and Ann, right? So you might, they weren't here too long ago. He came in, and the guy's dressed in a t-shirt with his hair out and like, you know, he's Hasidish and looking, and I mean, just completely, like, really schlumpy. And he's sitting there with a hummus and a pita right before the thing, just slopping it up, and she is dressed to the nines, man. She looks like, you know, like Shabbos. She walked right out of Shabbos. Lipstick and everything put together, articulate. Right, you'll see this. It's not an unusual thing. And she's in there trying to save this guy. And my work, right, which I was not successful in this particular case, was to sort of separate them. And one, help her understand what she's doing, right? Because I said, what am I doing? I've not got the problem. He's got the problem, right? You fix him and then I'll be okay.
That's
And a lot of times, as Lena pointed out, I need you to be this guy. I need you to stay there because I'm going to be superior and I'm going to feel comfortable because there's an unequal power dynamic. And you'll see this a lot of times with addiction, one side or the other, whether it be food. I mean, I know a couple that are friends of mine, and his mother, right? He grew up with a mother who was had a lot of depression. He ended up really taking care of the mom pretty much till she died. Once his mom died, then he got married to this woman who had depression problems and food problems, right?
Together?
Say again?
Took care of her.
Together?
Yeah, so going along, and she goes to a program after many years, right? Goes to a program, starts getting healthier, right? Working the 12 steps, doing some other things, and you know what he bought on her first birthday, right? Celebration, a cake, right? A cake, her favorite
Right.
cake, right? And then she went to him. You're going to go to therapy. Excuse me. You're going to go to therapy, right? Because like
This is
she was
very,
healthy
very,
enough to
very, very
realize
The
what was
sabotage.
going on, and he now, at some level with a lot of therapy, went, I needed my wife to be sick in bed.
Yeah.
I needed to be that, never look at this guy, right? I needed that. As my wife got better, it was very threatening to me.
That
And it's the
happens
same.
often.
Correct.
Often.
How
And
many
you will
guys
see this.
marry their mother? I think that's exactly
Correct.
Very,
You
very.
will see this with codependency, by the way. If
Yeah.
you have a codependent person come in, I've got a case or two I'm working with now, actually a man, and he, his wife is really turning up the heat now. He started coming in because he wasn't functioning well, and she, okay, got to go to therapy. All of a sudden now, he's starting to self-actualize and stand up to her and not get gaslighted. And she's like, you need to leave that therapist. You need to leave that therapist. And he's like, I go to bed happy all the time, but my wife is, like she keeps on telling me how bad I am. And they will turn up the heat because it's very threatening to them to have a change in dance. Howard, did you have something you want to say?
No, I think it was the exact same thing that you said.
Okay, good.
Um,
We'll keep on
It
agreeing
was
with you. We'll
something
keep on
just,
calling.
just something that you said that I thought was super important to go back to.
Hit me.
When you had little kids and you tell the little kids, and it happens unfortunately all too often, you're not gonna do well, or you're not gonna do well, or you're not gonna be good, that stays with them almost forever. And it kind of ruins their life in school. And I'm just referring to when teachers, and unfortunately we have it, who get on the first day, and these are first grade kids who are super excited, and the teacher goes, well, you're not gonna make it, you're not gonna make it, and you're not gonna make it, and they don't. But they go through life like this, and that's only because of what the teacher said, because that's an adult, they must know. And the
He's a
parents,
teacher.
unfortunately, do absolutely nothing without reinvigorating that kid, without saying you're gonna be successful, you'll be good, all the positive things, they don't say it. And we have that a lot, and then they grow up to be adults. And what happens when they're adults? They have all the problems that Gershon is talking about.
Right. Now, I want to answer Dove's question, and thank you, Howard.
Well,
I
these
think
are
you're right.
limiting beliefs. I think.
But with Robert and Ann, right, I was not successful. I got her to go to an Al-Anon meeting, and again, everybody that walks into my office, right, I don't always go, you're an addict, you're an addict. I mean, guy gets, his wife catches him watching pornography, and my husband's a sex addict. He says, no, okay, and it's anybody that's drinking, many times is drinking to survive a bad relationship. It doesn't always mean, even if they're abusing alcohol, that they that they are alcoholic. It's a specific,
Syndrome.
So yeah, symptom we can look at.
Syndrome.
Syndrome that separates somebody who's got alcoholism, that's a drug addict that loses bechir, and I mean really loses bechir. It's not like going to Shabbos and going, I don't want to eat that second piece of cake. Oh my God, I'm a food addict. No, we do that sometimes, even though it's against our will, but it's not. It doesn't affect our lives in such serious ways. But with this first couple, I was able to kind of separate them, right? And not separate them physically, but not separate them in the therapy, but was able to help them self-differentiate, or differentiate actually. And I got her to go to Al-Anon, right? I got him to sort of look at AA, although he's still at some level using, though he's using far less. She really ran with the Al-Anon program. It really helped her out. At one point, when he got very abusive when he was drinking, she called the police, right? Which is something she never would have done, right? Very self-empowered. And it basically changed the whole relationship. When she finally called the police and had him removed, right? They have not had another episode. The kids were frightened of him and things because he would get drunk and he would get obnoxious and whatever. The second that she did that, it changed around his drinking. Now he still uses, but in a much, I still think he's got a problem, but he's got it under control to a point of functionality. But it changed the whole relationship, and it changed her own opinion and belief about herself. She went back to school, okay? She got a degree in teaching English. She's now employed as a teacher, okay? And the whole family's sort of involved. So it's really important sometimes to work with the non-addict spouse. A lot of times they'll come in and you'll IP the addict and you'll put a lot of emphasis on him. Sometimes you need to separate that other person out or help them to stop enabling the exact behavior, like Lena said,
In what way were you not successful?
Huh?
In what way were you not successful?
I was successful with them, the other one I wasn't. He the wife went to a few Al-Anon meetings, but she keeps on enabling the husband. I mean, she keeps on allowing him. She goes, she wouldn't give him money, right? I at some level, I gave him a discount because they were going to pay cash. Don't tell the tax authority. And but she wouldn't, right? She wouldn't give him money because, well, if I give him money, he's just going to end up spending it on liquor. And it's like, how do you not kind of put your foot down and whatever? She had to do the shopping. She would do things. She would try things to try and keep him from drinking. And it was just really unhealthy behavior that she never stopped on her side. And if you're an alcoholic, right? Somebody thinks you go into a doctor and the doctor says you got 12 months to live if you don't stop drinking the way that you do. So a normal person goes, man, I better stop. That's really going to be bad. And an alcoholic says, well, I got 11 months before it gets really bad.
Right. Very different.
Again, you go to an AA meeting, you laugh, but that would be, they think differently. And so, why would a guy stop drinking and drugging if his wife's pulling in all the dough and he doesn't have to work, take on all that stress, he can sit and drink all day long? Why would he want to stop?
So I want to ask, because when a woman would make the phone call for the husband, you wouldn't want to take the case.
I would not take the case. I said, give my phone number to your husband.
Okay, and she doesn't do that. But you're just seeing this therapy as if you would see it in the room. It's starting even before they call.
Of course.
So there are cases you would take and not put up with, and there are cases that you would put up with. This is a
I don't mind addiction cases. I don't like personality disorders.
So this is a tie into what I'm going to ask here is that the case that you were successful and the case that you were not successful, these people are so enmeshed, so tied to each other.
Correct.
Where can you identify who you could be successful with and who you can't be successful with?
No.
There are sometimes.
Or they all come in so tied to each other, like on a Richter scale
There
of.
are times that I work with people and I go, this guy's never going to get sober, and they do.
And they do.
And there are times where they come in and I think, wow, I really got this, and they're gone. Listen, I don't know if anybody else has had this as a therapist, but sometimes, I think, how am I going to help this person? How am I going to help this couple? and I just think, I got nothing, I got no idea how to do this, and then we go 3, 4, 5 months, and then all of a sudden, it's like, still have no idea what I did.
Right.
They just, you work, you challenge, you do things, you try things, and if the couple is committed to it, normally the couple grows. I think that at some point, my experience with my own addiction and working with people is, you gotta have some sort of bottom, you gotta have some sort of surrender, and it doesn't always have to be under a bridge, but something has to happen where a person decides that they wanna change their lives. And how that happens, I don't know.
Do you present that to them?
Yes, 100%. I mean, that's at least, I work with the 12 steps.
They want to change their lives.
There are other people that have other methods. If I think somebody, there's a movie that I play in front of, actually, if anybody wants to watch, there's a thing for therapists. SA is doing something, I think it's July 23rd. I'm going to be speaking briefly about sex addiction. They're going to have some members of SA talking. But I have this thing when I teach or when I give these talks, it's called Rat Park. I don't know if anybody's seen Rat Park? R-A-T Park, okay? Right, so I showed it when I did it. It's amazing. So there's a psychologist by the name of Bruce Alexander, and he did an experiment, right? The first experiment was done, they put a rat in a cage with cocaine and water laced with cocaine and just regular water. The rat by himself, right, drank the water with cocaine till he died, or she died, didn't matter. And then, so Bruce Alexander changed the experiment, put cocaine-laced water and regular water, plus other rats, like groups of rats, male and female, all kinds of toys that rats could play with. And what he found, which was very interesting, was none of the rats drank till they died. They didn't even touch the cocaine-laced water.
They had fun with each other.
They had fun with each other. So the theory was, in this Rat Park, which I thought was real interesting, was that addiction isn't, everything we understand about addiction is wrong. You'll pull it up on YouTube, for those of you who just put Rat Park, you'll see. What I showed you this, right, in Path. So the interesting thing, at least for me, was they talk about the cage, and if you change the cage, and it's about connection. Right, so what they use is the Vietnam War as an example. There was about 20% of the soldiers in Vietnam that were using heroin.
Yeah.
Right, when they came back, they thought when the war ended they were going to have a huge addiction problem. And what they found was, and they used 95% of the people that came back, right, didn't even go into withdrawal, right, rarely went into withdrawal, and stopped using almost immediately. So everything about addiction we understand. If you just change the cage, right? Now, what do you think I heard with that? Some of you pick it up. Don't say anything because you heard it. Don't say anything, right? I picked up 95%. What happened to the other 5%?
Right, where's the other 5%?
And I'm like, the other 5%, those are the people that are addicts, right? And you used to see the yeshivas here, they used to have a few of them. They said, oh, we're a drug and alcohol yeshiva. They took the kids in, bad situations, they gave them love, and the ones that straightened out, right, they capped, and the addicts, they kicked them out. And I'm saying, look, you can say that you work with kids at risk, but if you say you work with addiction and you kick the addicts out, you're not doing that. And that's the problem that we have, is people come in sometimes and they're abusing, right? The DSM talks about alcohol abuse, and there's different levels. The addict is a person that loses behavior. It doesn't matter what changes in the world. It doesn't matter how good things are, how bad. They are the ones that keep on drinking, using, gambling, doing
Well,
whatever.
it's similar to trauma. Somebody can go through a trauma, and we know that after about a month, their symptoms will decrease. After 3 months, they won't. And the percentage of people who actually have trauma after an event, like an earthquake or witnessing a terrorist attack, is actually quite low, because the brain actually has, especially if they get support.
They did studies at 9/11 on
Yes, because if they get support, the brain actually was able to right itself and heal. It's a very interesting thing. However, a child who is in a world where they depend on adults to protect them, and those adults in their world, as you were saying, are unpredictable, not reliable, maybe just disappear because they're ill. This effect on the child's development is profound. And that's what we're learning and understanding about attachment, and why attachment has this effect on people. But that does not mean that every child who has that will end up with some problems with a major attachment disorder, because people have incredible ability to be resilient.
And I would say that even a child that builds up an anxious avoidant
Yeah.
is resilient. They're
Yes.
just resilient, and that resiliency ends up helping them survive
Right.
in that relationship.
But it doesn't
Yeah.
always help them, as we know, as adults. So in other words,
Right.
something that works as a kid, which we tend to carry because it worked when I was little, and we will naturally carry that into adulthood, that doesn't always serve us so well as an adult. And that is one of the big jobs that we do as therapists. Well, yes, when you were 6 years old, that definitely helped you. They're not even aware, people aren't even aware they're doing that. And when people come in with food addiction, sometimes I'll ask them, well, when did you first realize, or food problems with food, when did you first realize food could help me? 2, 3, 4, they're still there. Because it helps. These things really do help. They're just not so effective into adulthood. They sure help a kid survive.
Dov, I saw you looking at your watch. My question.
Yeah, it would be great if you just tell me, because we understand, I think we get the problem, I think we're
I
all
don't know
talking
if there
about the
are
problem.
stages, though.
I wanna hear how you do it, because what are the skills that we can gain from you to take with us? Identifying, I think, unless we have questions on the identifying piece, I think a great job in identifying where the codependency is. Maybe when is it borderline codependency? You talk to somebody about codependency, they'll say, well, doesn't everybody care about their husbands or care about their wives? So when does it turn into a codependency? That's one. And what are the skills? Well, what do you do that works? Because when I'm dealing with them, it's not working. I turned somebody off right away. They came in, she was quiet the whole time. I did regular stuff. I did not identify him as codependency. I said a very meek woman. I tried to get them to talk together. She didn't want to come back. Why? Later on, I saw him from years, trying to figure out that they're codependent, and what she was doing was pulling the strings and creating an emotional abuse. And I wanted her to talk and have a normal relationship, and she didn't want to come back.
Okay, I
Doesn't
mean,
mean you did anything wrong.
What's that?
Doesn't mean you did anything wrong.
no, I
I
mean,
said, let's talk. How about we talk?
To be very tentative
How
at the
does it
beginning.
feel when she says this? How does it feel when she's quiet?
Doesn't
I
always
mean, you only
work.
saw, you only
She's
saw.
not
you
interested
only
in going
saw
that
one.
way. She wanted me, I saw them
She wanted you to fix
four
your
or five
husband?
times. Fix the husband.
That's the
To
color.
see how abusive he is. Look what he's doing to
When-
me. And she didn't even express it in
Correct.
words. Because she didn't want to give up the power. The power is I'm quiet
There is a
and
power,
make
and
him
the
crazy.
codependent can feel a lot of power. The person that's IPing the other one can feel a lot of power.
She's got so much power.
Yeah.
She's,
You
A
think
depressed
that they're
person
not.
can also have power.
Correct.
incredible.
I ask in what brings you here today? And
Yeah,
those
yeah,
are my
yeah.
two questions. What brings you here today? And if what brings you here today gets fixed, what would it look like at the end? And I always laugh
Mm-hmm.
because when we get couples, sometimes a husband sort of looks at the wife and sort of figures out what the best answer is to make her happy. And I go, what brings you here today? He does. He needs to be fixed. So,
Maybe it's just.
all right,
Sounds like
so
he's- Let me ask you a question. The 5% that came back from Vietnam, right, that stated it, is it no neuroplasticity there?
what?
Neuroplasticity.
Well,
Doesn't,
neuroplasticity.
doesn't work with addicts? Doesn't exist?
I mean, I think it does.
I think that's what helps them ultimately heal if they can.
But the neuroplasticity, if you
So
look
say,
at AA, is
'cause it-
changing from changing to a spiritual life as they change over time, going to AA meetings and hearing things and trying to redo and live a different life.
I
So they
understand.
change the neural pathways for sure.
But in the smell of the wine gets them back. Like you can't.
Well, there's
I
but
cope
there's
with wine
physiological
now,
things.
and I don't have a problem.
And you're
with it.
okay
So
now.
I would be okay. I wouldn't do it for the first 5 years. Okay, so 1 second, Howard, because I saw
That's
first.
an interesting point. Thanks,
Here's a
Gershon.
question. So we're talking about identifying. So as somebody who works with premarital, so I want to identify this so that somebody isn't gravitating towards a scary relationship. I want to try to see the signs beforehand. What am I looking for?
Again, codependent relationships can start out, the last one I put, if you see trauma bonds, right?
Yeah.
Those are much easier to these, those have been getting together at 14 years old, they hit off and they're inseparable,
Right.
you're talking about, especially if you work in the more religious
Mhm.
population, I don't think it'd be really hard to spot that unless you got a somebody totally borderline with a personality disorder, somebody with, with narcissistic, something that would stick out. And even those times, the people are very, very good at hiding those types of things.
I really believe that we are attracted really, really quickly on a subconscious level to all sorts of things.
Right.
And then we spend the rest of our relationship figuring those things out. Most of these things are not conscious. Like, when you think of somebody with codependent tendencies, narcissistic tendencies, they're not always so obvious. And they're not in every single relationship the person has.
No, they're not. You're seeing somebody from.
Sometimes it's really obvious.
When you're seeing somebody in the development of a relationship, they're starting to date, they're starting to meet somebody, and they're reporting, they're saying the good things. I always say I'm trying to now to make a certain distinction for myself. There's a certain trajectory from vigilance to vulnerability.
Okay.
So we start with vigilant. Okay, you're protecting yourself, you're trying to figure it out, you're
Sure.
judging, you're judgmental, and then that slowly has to gradually turn into vulnerable. Sometimes people skip the vigilance because, well, my mother checked him out already, he's already good. They're no longer protecting themselves.
Sure.
They just jump to the vulnerable, which is, I'm gonna, he must be good. This must, whatever, they're ignoring whatever I'm seeing, all the signs. So, we're not getting, or if you're working with a kala who's already engaged, and you start to see, the weird things that they're.
Sometimes you get, again, if people
So
make a
what are we
decision,
looking
they're
for?
gonna get married, and it's sometimes hard when that wave starts to go. My thing is just challenge them, so help me to, like a lot of times, I've done some premarital counseling a little bit, and, sometimes, like Robert Breitowitz sent me a client or 2 years ago, and I'd say to him, listen, it seems to me like you guys wanna get married, but you can't even get along now. You should be, the happiest thing. Like, you're sitting here working so hard and trying to figure out how to date. Help me understand why you want to get married. I just a real honest answer. It doesn't, like, what are you doing?
Looking for in your relationship?
What are you looking for in a relationship? Because it doesn't seem like this is working very well. I mean, you call a spade. Like, if somebody's in there individually and they're complaining about this person that they're dating, I'll say so help me understand why you want to get married to this person. It doesn't sound like it's working very well. Or even when I get married, just one of the things, and I'll a lot of times women initiate about 80% of the divorce thing. So again, it's just not knocking women, it's just the way it is. So you get a lot more women coming in individually talking about unhappiness in the marriage.
Yeah.
And I will listen. I'll give a session or 2 sessions, and depending on what it is. And I'll ask real curiously. I'll say, like, it seems like it's really a difficult marriage for you. And I'll say, well, what keeps you in the marriage?
Yeah, what keeps
What,
you there?
what keeps you there? Like, and why are you staying? It's like, well, what keeps you there? It's curious.
What keeps
And
you there?
they'll come up with some different reasons, and then you can start exploring that. But what keeps you, like, you're not married yet. What's pushing you to stay in this relationship? So I might say, my mother likes this guy, or whatever. And you say, okay, is your mother going to be the one married to him? Is your father going to be? Is it, well, the families look good, or I want a Kolel guy, or I want a Kolel wife. Whatever it is. You remember, there's a lot of other things than just that are looking. Is this, if you guys can't get along now, how do you think you're going to work through that in marriage? Now, sometimes people do, but
Sometimes they're just lacking the skills in the.
That could be
like you
true.
said at the beginning. You need a lot of education. That'd be great.
of course, sometimes it's just that, and it's hard to figure. It's hard to know.
It's hard to know.
It's hard to know.
That's exactly my question.
I mean, it's a guessing game. Like I said, I'm real honest. I sometimes have no idea what I do with people. Thank God, a lot of them get better, and a lot of times I do know. And there are other times where I just sit there after, the people will terminate, and they'll, they're good. You did such a great job. I'm like, yeah, tell me, because I'm trying to figure out what it is that worked here. I know I did some things, and I know that we did these things, but I still don't quite understand how this whole thing played out. And I talked to my supervisor. He said also too, it's like some people are very clear. Here's what's got to move, and other times it's not.
It sounds like what you're saying. One of the good places to start is you do a lot of the demon work in the backgrounds, and if you're seeing the traumas, and we're seeing the
100%.
we're seeing the the old stuff, then that's already tipping us off that we have to like prepare the ground for the scuffle. Can they get through that?
I was taught it today by and I thought it was crap, by the way. Excuse my language, but and I thought, it was like, they did my genogram, and I'm like, yeah, right. And, I did mine at 50 years old, maybe a shtickle a year after, and I looked at my genogram, and I was just like, I went back to therapy. Because at 51 years old, I was like, oh my, because I thought I was who I was, and then I just realized, like, grandparents and things, and my parents, and all of this stuff, and I was like, I wish I had done mine in my 20s. Okay, anybody that's not doing family systems work, that's not sitting there and doing some detailed background on the way your client grew up.
Yeah,
it's
that's one of the
selling yourself
first
short.
questions I ask. How was conflict handled in your house? What happened in your home?
Right.
Always,
Right.
to find out what was your view of money, what was your view of this, what
Right.
happened when you were growing up. And boy, oh boy, you get an awful lot of
Correct.
information really, really, really quickly about this person and their view of the world.
Now, I like doing genograms, because I
You
think,
like
I
like
like the
doing
story
genograms
of
too.
trying, tell me about your brothers and sisters,
Yeah,
tell me
I
about
like
this,
that too.
which one did you get along with, tell me
Yeah.
how your parents relate, because you'll hear things
Yeah.
between the lines
I like
that
that.
when you ask a question of somebody, they already kind of know a pat answer. When you're doing genogram work and you're looking at these
Yeah,
things,
it's
you'll get a
interesting.
much better idea if you see 2 or 3 siblings struggling with the same thing. Or even so, if
Yeah.
you get a kid that says, I don't remember much about my childhood, well, that says something.
Right.
Okay, that is a big marker for something that's gone on that's probably abuse, okay? Howard, you had a question?
I was just gonna respond about NOM. Basically, the reason why
Oh,
a
NOM.
lot of the guys
That's-
took drugs in NOM
Oh, it's really hard
was
to know.
actually to forget. It
What was-
wasn't for any other reason.
course,
Just to forget what they were doing.
Yeah,
Agreed.
what they were doing was pretty
And
horrible.
they had no clue going in there, and it was super violent war, not your, no war is typical, but
It was really,
It's-
it was very, and very hand-in-hand combat.
it was, yeah, but it was America,
Really.
if they didn't like you in your unit, you better watch your back, because they would have,
Yeah.
DOA, they did the shooting.
It was a tough war. It wasn't like World War II or
No.
World War I, where people
No,
was
very
pride in going and defending
No,
your
no,
country.
no, no.
This is a war that you were there. But anyways, I hear you. And people drank and did
Korean
drugs
War.
to kind of.
When they came back, they had money. Remember, when they came back, one day you were in Nam at the movies, and the next day you were already back within 72 hours stateside, and you had no time for that break. You need that break.
Sure.
And so the first thing they did
That's
is, what do I
interesting.
know? I'm gonna go get a drink, I have money in my pocket, because they just gave you a month's worth of money, and that's what they did.
So
It
interesting.
was pretty horrendous, and the guys will tell you that themselves, it was really bad.
Sure.
It was a really, and the way they handled it was really bad.
No, it was-
We have
it
the,
was-
Oh, we didn't handle it.
there was
we
no
just-
handling it.
Okay.
We don't know what they learned
I
from
hear
it.
you, but okay, let's just kind of, because I agree, but let me go, because I only got 25 more minutes, although coming back.
We're coming back.
We're
Yeah,
coming
part
back.
two.
I gotta think of more stuff to talk about. Well, so let's talk about, so we did addiction, right? You wanted to, the way that I work is I try and separate the enabler from the addict, okay? That is the first thing, okay? Don't IP, in any of these cases, oh, by the way, codependent, don't IP one side or the other. Everything is systemic, huh?
So what is that?
Individual
Therapy?
Identified patient.
Identified patient, okay?
Identified patient, because it's not, it's a system.
It's a system, it's always systemic.
That's why we have Al-Anon, which is really helpful.
Well,
What's it
or
called?
even in abusive relationships.
Sure,
I mean,
don't identify.
you have to see it systemically, because if you start to IP one, then you're playing right in, as Dub said, right? The woman wasn't talking and trying things, and there's a lot of power in being a victim, as we see in the world today. The whole
That's
world
true.
is victimized, and it's a lot of power in it, but it doesn't make people happy.
necessarily so good for the victims.
Correct.
Sometimes.
So that so it's,
Sometimes. Sometimes people will get out and the abuser will just torment them and then
okay.
through courts or-
I hear that there are people who are victimized in the world
that are not
that are
part
not.
of that system.
I am
right?
agree.
Agree?
Agreed, okay, so that's not what we're talking about here, we're talking about the world has become, we become a.
That is true, but I'm
society of
just,
victims.
you know.
What did you said, separating the addict from.
Meaning that you have this couple that's joined and they have a dance that's going, that's
Okay.
really unhealthy. And the addict, a lot of times, especially if it's a guy, becomes like a little child, right? And, he's playing this game with mom and hiding things, and, or this story is very funny. I had this woman come in and she found her husband's stash, right? And, you know, I had tried a lot of times to sit down and say, your job is not to keep your husband sober anymore. Okay? He is going, your job is to detach from it and, like, figure out how to live your life. And actually, eventually she did. Husband would get high and drunk on Shabbat and would make everybody miserable. And finally, she didn't want to get divorced. She had good reason. And she and the kids would then start going out and leave the house because he wouldn't go out anyplace because then he couldn't, of course, drink and drug the way he wanted. So they started just making plans. She made him a chocolate and he went out. And the whole family sort of changed. But before this happened, she goes, I found my husband's stash. I just was looking for a screwdriver. And I was like, okay, that sounds unusual. I said, what were you looking for a screwdriver? I needed to change a light bulb. He said, okay. When's the last time you changed a light bulb? Well, I haven't changed one, but I wanted to this time. And I said, and where were you looking for the screwdriver? In the basement. In the basement where? In the basement under a pile of stuff, in the back, under, you know, like, and it's serious as a heart attack. But I was looking for the screwdriver, and here's what I found. She was going all over the house, trying to find his top. Okay? This is the obsession that happens with these people. They try and keep, and you'll see this a lot if you do with pornography. Wives will go through, they want to be web chavers, they want to do this, they want to check the husband's stuff. It's so bad, and I've had even from really big rabbis who I respect will tell the wife, yes, you can be the web chaver. It is bad. Don't do it, okay? It doesn't help. If you have a person, I have a case right now that I was talking about. So the thing is, his wife came from a father that had a gambling addiction, took the family into bankruptcy, they lost their house, right? She married this guy, very codependent. He's, you know, finally, you know, started to feel control. He has a sex addiction, okay? He's looking at pornography and masturbating. And she wants to be in the web chaver, she wants to do this, she wants to that. Web, I said, yeah.
It's to protect.
A web chaver is you can give somebody, you have your IP address, and there's a company that gets whatever you watch, the person can
They basically see your history. They see your history.
They have AI that detects if you watch anything problematic.
You say it's not good.
No, it is the
wife should not be their policeman.
If a rabbi says that, a wife should not, like, she should be able to watch everything. No,
like
because if you're a person that's insecure, you can't control your way into security. Okay, and that's what Al-Anon teaches people. You cannot control your way into security. The more control you try and get, the less control you feel. It doesn't work. Okay, and that's what I mean by separating these types of people.
I just give you an example.
Please.
Right before, which is simple because it doesn't have to do with codependence. It has to do with a client I saw right before who has a hard time with her emotions. So I told her, okay, honey, what happens when you feel a strong emotion? And she goes, she distracts herself. I go for a run. I try to bake bread. It's nothing bad. I said, no, I want you to sit with your emotion. She goes, oh, I don't want to do that. I said, well, that's what we're going to do here. And she does. Good for her. And she does. And she notices it in her body, and it's not comfortable. She goes through the whole thing, and she goes, that was really hard. And I said, you did great. She said, I want to tell you that in retrospect, I really enjoy our therapy. Why did I make her do that? Because this client has a hard time with being vulnerable and connecting on a genuine level. Why? Not 100% sure why. Could be stuff in their family, begin to dig a little, but that I don't also know how long she's going to stay with me. But one of the reasons why I made sure she sat there and experienced that.
Oh, with you in the room?
Yeah, in session.
Okay, in session. Okay.
Is because I know that she'll get involved in a relationship and she will not really be present. When a person is an addict, they are able to not really be present because emotions suck. People don't like to feel them. They hurt. They're not fun. It's much better to drink, watch porn, eat a lot of chocolate.
Or all of them.
All at the same time, than feel anything. And one of the things we do as therapists is get our clients to be able to feel and not run from those physical sensations that come up.
I want to add something too, because
and she's not an addict. She's a really she's not Jewish. She's a really religious Christian girl who really would like to find a nice guy, have a nice Christian home.
Nice Jewish guy.
Well, no, hopefully not a nice Christian guy.
I-
I'm hoping it's gonna be a nice Christian
I
guy.
have a point that I think is important. As the alcoholic, addict,
It's gonna be a nice Christian
is
guy.
addicted to whatever they're addicted to, the codependent is addicted to the addict. And I
Yes,
think you
this
have
is
to understand.
very important.
It's a really important, it is a really
The
important point. that I
codependent
make.
is addicted to the addict.
You know, you will hear
So she married him
things.
4 times.
Huh?
So she married him 4 times.
And they can't do it when they get better.
It is like really, it's like catnip.
You know,
And I think you guys gotta pick that up.
But I want to again tell you what is going on with people is why do people do these things? Why do they start? Because to go inside and feel these very difficult emotions of pain, sadness, not anger, pain, sadness, being rejected, dealing with the fact that whatever happened to you when you were a childhood and you didn't feel seen. People don't want to do that. They'd rather do anything else. And they get themselves in these crazy cycles, which they're not inside. They're not dealing with themselves. They're dealing with, I will not get addicted to my addict's story. And then I myself can just, I don't have to deal with myself. It's all about them. This is the work of us as therapists to help those people come in and say, what's going on with you and your ability to manage these very difficult emotions without reaching for either the addict you're related to or the addictive substance.
And a lot of
It's really
times-
hard for people. People don't like it.
And a lot of times when I have wives calling, because usually the wife calls me
Yeah.
for the husband, so I'll try and get her and say, listen, husband doesn't want to come in, why don't you come in?
Yeah.
We'll talk about it and see if I can help you
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
live in this less than perfect relationship.
100%, which
And
means
then I can,
dealing
then I
with
can
all this
start,
stuff.
then I can start helping her.
It's
9
not
times
easy.
out of 10, when I can work with a parent, with a child, and get them to detach with love, and
Yeah.
I always say, it usually helps the addict get sober.
Sure.
It's one of those things where everybody tries to steer towards the addict, and if you steer towards the enabling parent,
Yeah,
or
I'm
the
with
enabling
you.
spouse,
Wow.
a lot of times it.
I'm with you 100%.
You know, I was thinking on Shabbos.
No,
what
because this
we
is
said.
really,
No, it's interesting. I don't know, maybe you
And I
you
always
won't
do the
agree with
same
this,
thing.
but I was learning Rashi, and it says "Vatiktzar nefesh ha'om baderech." It
What's
says
that?
that they were in the midbar,
Oh, yes.
and they
They get
were
into
traveling.
all sorts of trouble there.
Right,
Whoa, do they
right,
get
so
into
they
trouble?
travel,
It's
and the
amazing.
pasuk says "Vatiktzar nefesh ha'om baderech." This kitzur nefesh actually explains when you can't hold it in your heart.
Right, right.
Short temper.
You can't hold that
No, they say
tsar,
that.
pain in your
It's
heart,
too much for them.
right? So
Right.
that's called right, and that's where they acted out kind of.
Mm-hmm. So they did. It's amazing we're still here. Thank goodness.
So, but I want to understand what happens actually when you hold it, when you actually allow yourself to feel.
So what happens? So that's why if a person is so overwhelmed and there's so much pain, they need someone to do it with them.
Right.
By themselves, they can explode.
Let's talk about something manageable.
So Mandy,
What happens? What happens in the person?
Let me go
Sorry.
ahead, because
Yeah.
one of the things that I think having a person sit with their own emotions, right? It's like a muscle, and I use this analogy.
It's a muscle, yes.
Anybody has ever stretched a muscle, when you've
It's a
gone,
muscle,
you,
yeah, for
you
sure.
take it and you breathe, and then the muscle relaxes.
Mhm.
Emotional muscle is built the same way.
Great.
When you sit with it and you can hold that, and I have to tell you, people come in, and especially again codependents, and they'll talk about their day and the things, and you sit
Mhm.
down and say, so it sounds like you're feeling da da da. It sounds like you're feeling
Yeah.
da da. And you will watch the calmness, the level of calmness. The second they can identify and sit with
They calm
what's
down.
going on,
It's
they calm
amazing.
down.
They calm
so
down.
people being able to
I
sit
want to
with
understand
discomfort.
what happens inside us.
It's
We're
just the
able to
alarm
sit
bells.
with our uncomfortable
We will
emotions.
do
what happens
anything.
within us. So I'm trying to
It
understand.
clears through your body if you allow people to, if you sit with them and trust them.
I would
And that's
tell-
No, but you
all
can
the
do
major
yourself with the
therapies.
manageable emotions.
All
You
the
can do
major
that yourself.
therapies today, they do the same thing.
I would tell you that, the therapy line is learning how to manage discomfort.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we
That's what
do as
mediation
therapists.
is all about.
Of
It's
course.
just sitting there and
But they're
chilling
not.
out
But
and
they're
figuring
not.
out what you
But they're
gotta
not
do.
alone. You're with them, and you're doing mirror neurons with them, and you're saying, "I'm here with you, and I believe you can get through this." And it's the power of the brain. So they feel
Or it can.
Amazing.
they mirror. We have something in the brain called mirror neurons. And that is what gives our clients the power to do their work. Because we're there, like Gershon said, and he's like, okay, nice lady, what about you? A nice lady keeps talking about hubby. And Gershon says, I hear he's very difficult, but nice lady. What about you?
Well, my line is, he's not here right now.
And he's not here right now, right?
So
what
he's
about
not
you?
my
Exactly.
client, you're my
client.
Why don't you tell me about you? And
I do
it's
that all the time.
How hard they fight.
Oh, they don't want to do that.
So let me just.
But it's beautiful. It's really, really important to understand that that's really the basis of all our work.
And I would say another thing, that our work, your concept is being able to hold your client, to be able to explore that in really uncomfortable place. The more that your client feels that you can contain them, right?
Because they feel like they're going crazy inside.
The more that they will have permission to look at that place and sit with that discomfort with you there with them. And I think that's what we do as therapists. It's what I do as a marital therapist. It's like I give couples permission to say things that they don't want to say and hear things that they don't want to hear, and then sit in discomfort, right, till they realize like that's really the most important part of marriage, more than jewelry and flowers and candlelight dinners.
So you let the couple, you let the
Although the jewelry and flowers.
who's saying the stuff that they don't want to hear, and who's sitting, like, are they saying it, is each one saying it to you and they're sitting?
So the way I work, and again, this is not about codependency, but we're gonna wind down. I use a different technique. I don't let my clients talk to them. I say, you got 23 hours and 6 days to talk to each other. Here you talk to me, so you can be curious observers of each other. Because when people are talking, they're just waiting for somebody to finish so they can say what they're going to say. When they're talking to me, they're much better listening to what the other person's saying. And I'll just say, so what was that like to hear with your spouse? Because then I can get an experiential, right? What was that thing? What did it mean to you? What did it say when you heard that? What is the things I can do them? Because those are the things that help people develop an access to self, right? And you watch.
This is Gershon's technique, which works for him. There are a few different. He's very good at
it. It works for me, but it doesn't have to work. But I use that, and I find it to be very effective. And sometimes I'll have people talk to each other, but I just really find that they're far less reactive and feel like they can speak in a much different way if they're speaking to me. Even I'll say, your spouse is here. I promise that he or she will hear you. And once they get that place, it's easier for them to say. And as they learn to say those things, it becomes less painful to hear those things, because that's what people do. They say things sometimes that aren't easy to say. Yeah,
But that's what's important, and I think that's what Lena was saying. Everybody has their own technique. There is no one technique that works for everybody. But if you know your technique and it works for you, it may not work for me, may not work for her, but if it works for you, that's all that's important.
And not only that, but it might not work for every client.
No.
Right, yeah.
Correct.
So you have to figure out, if it doesn't work for one, try another one.
I let my clients talk, but I'm always looking for the pattern. So if I see I'm looking for the developmental pattern. So I'll see a pattern. This client feels resentful. This client doesn't feel seen. This client, but I know that it's not just coming from this relationship. It's coming from something in the past. Something going on back, because that's assuming that there is no abuse. We're just assuming if there's abuse or real, but I listen, and then I'm trying to figure out how, either sometimes you try to see, can they have empathy for each other? Maybe yes, maybe no. Can they validate each other? Maybe yes, maybe no. But I can tell you that I repeat it over and over again. So there's a point in the therapy, which Gershon was kind of saying, all of a sudden they're like listening to each other. And by the way, Gershon, I also don't always know how it happens. All of a sudden they walk in one day, and that issue was, it was a couple, and every time he wanted to go on vacation, they're just a very nice couple. He wanted to go on vacation, she couldn't stand it. All of a sudden he said, I told her all about my vacation plans and she listened to me. I cannot tell you how I got there. All I know is I got there by just hanging in with him and not giving up. And it's not such a complicated case. It's a nice example to give these more simple cases. But I think we can build on that. And what Gershon is saying about this is codependency is a very interesting term. A lot of people throw it away, and it's really, really important we can identify it, because I love your definition of loss of self. And can you tell us more about that? Because I think that's so important.
Yeah, I mean, again, people who are highly codependent, right, to a point where they've lost themselves.
So
I think
understand.
that again, how to identify it. To me, it's really clear. you know, somebody comes in and they're telling you a story about somebody else. And they, you know, they just keep on talking and there is no self. None. They don't, you know, they won't talk about a feeling, they won't talk about things, they don't talk about an experience, they just talk about a story and what this person is doing, right? And
And how hard they're trying. It's often in there.
The professor used to work, we called it stimulus entrapped. They're like entrapped in the stimulus, whatever it is.
Such a good
yeah.
word as well.
right, and if they're trying to change that person to do what they need them to do so they can feel secure.
Indeed, yeah.
And it's exactly the opposite. I mean, it's like, you know, I always say when people walk in, you want to make yourself crazy, try and figure out what you can't figure out, right? You want to make yourself really anxious, try and control what you can't control. And again, these people are trying to control somebody, and when they're not doing it, you know, and a lot of times the person married to a codependent starts to rebel because they can't do enough.
Or in a relationship. A lot of friendships with women are like this. It's all the same idea.
But people will rebel because at some point it
Yeah.
becomes, you cannot be with these kind of people because they're never okay. And you know, give them this and have a talk and then you'll do something and then they'll well, you gotta do this now, you gotta do this now. And there's never a place where a person in the residence, if you're obviously friends, you can leave the relationship. If you're married, it becomes far more
If
complicated.
you're a
How do you
parent,
get
it
the
becomes.
person who's never okay to start to be okay?
In touch with self.
Self.
I've watched it. I have a case right
Touch with
now
self.
where it's interesting. I have two sisters now. One came in with a husband. It's one
And I
of the
mean
cases.
who's like fully focused on the relationship and them and IPing and all the rest of it.
Well, yes. Two sisters. One that came in with her husband a long time ago. I still see him. Both came from, like, the father was very abusive. So, like, and it's interesting because they're both in codependent relationships. The second sister came in like 3 or 4 months ago, and she has a husband who's not well, and it was, again, it was so much of him. There's another part of it that I won't get into because I don't want anybody to kind of know. But there was, like, again, she had an emotional relationship. She had an emotional affair with somebody else as well. So she's like, and she's talking about, what do you think? What do you think? Do you think he likes me? Do you think this? Do you think that? And everything's about getting her own place of validation. And after a session or two, I just said, you know, we're the same thing. We're talking. And over the last 3 or 4, month and a half, what about you? What about you?
What about you? It's always back to the
and all of a
person.
sudden, she comes in the last couple of weeks and says, I don't know, I've been feeling happier lately. And what do you think that is? And it's unbelievable to me how much it goes fairly quickly as well. When you start getting a person accessing self and being able to describe what's going on for them, and they ask you what he did. I asked what went on for you when this happened. And they use I language, you know, I'm feeling and things. It happens pretty quickly, okay? That a person can do, most of the time, make that shift and start to talk about themselves, and then change starts happening, either with themselves to feel more in touch and to be happier, or to start changing the relationship around, which becomes difficult sometimes because the person that's usually, they start many times, especially if they're the abusive kind, starts pushing back, you know, if they're an abusive spouse. So, go ahead.
I just want, that's great, that was really wonderful.
Thank you, sir. You can come back next time.
What, is there a point that you just say, okay, I put in X amount of time with this couple, they're not moving, they're still tied to each other.
They're still coming to you?
Yes.
Or do I just
I
say,
have a couple
okay, I
like
can't
that.
help you, go to somebody else?
Nah.
Or
Hang
just
in.
keep
There's
them for years?
Well, Lena,
No, I
you
don't
have,
do-
what's
I
your
don't
record,
do-
Lena?
What?
How long have you had somebody? How long have you had a client?
years.
Wait, I want to ask.
I mean, look, I'm
They keep coming back.
Codependency,
They get a
it
little bit.
might crack after a number of years, or it just might continue.
Look, I have a couple right now where there's some codependency or whatever, but I'm just gonna, I won't say you guys got to get out, but I'm just saying, listen, what are we doing here?
Yeah,
Because
sometimes
I don't think that we're moving.
Sometimes
So,
I'll say
you know, you haven't made a decision, you want to stay in the marriage, and you do things like, okay, let's talk about this, because you guys are spending an hour a day coming here, plus a lot of money, and we're not moving. So, you know, I challenge couples a lot, yeah.
You didn't cover the last two, just the
Yeah,
relationship,
We'll do it
psychiatric and
next
trauma.
time.
So psychiatric ones are really tough. I don't have an answer. I think when you've got somebody married in a personality disorder, the work is with the person that doesn't have the personality disorder. Okay, and it's how to live. First of all, to sit down, what keeps you in the marriage, and help them to understand that they're making a choice. A lot of times people say, oh, I can't leave, we got the kids, who's gonna do, you know, a lot of times people married to people with personalities, or if they really understand how dysfunctional their spouse is, and they go, if I leave, it's gonna be terrible.
Yeah,
I
what's
gotta
gonna
take
happen
care
to
of
the
my kids."
family?
So they stay, and say, okay, so then you're making a choice to stay. Let's figure out, once you empower somebody, once they say, yeah, I can't leave because of this, I say, no, you can leave. Lots of people leave marriages, right? They live in one-bedroom apartments in squalor because they don't want to be married to. So,
It's
no,
true.
I'm not willing to do that. Okay, so now you're choosing to stay.
Right.
And once I can get them
It's
to
choice.
empower themselves, that they've made a choice to be in this less than perfect marriage, then how do we stay in it and be as happy as we can in a less than perfect marriage?
There's a lot out there on that.
Correct.
And
But
what do
that's the things, but I work with a person that doesn't have the psychiatric problem and try and help them to learn how to live in this really difficult, probably not changing person.
And what do you mean by trauma bonds?
Trauma bonds is gonna be another, it's just people that there isn't a psychiatric issue, there isn't an addiction issue, but they're really codependent. And there's just, you know, and that, you know, the term today for codependency, the new term is called trauma bonds.
Okay, it's
And
not
it
like
just-
two people who went through a trauma together and.
Well, I mean, you
unite
know,
over
either
it.
they
That's
grew,
what it is.
either they grew up with a, you know, abuse of this or abuse of that, and they get together and they bond over this thing, and they become. Sometimes these people actually can cope in adult attachment. They reparent each other
Yeah, they
and
can.
end up having very good marriages. Other times they become very codependent instead of interdependent. The trick is we should be interdependent in a marriage. We marry because two people can run a household and take care of it better than one and have children. So interdependence is what we shoot for. Codependence in place of unhealthy dependence is the thing.
So you're not referring to two people who met in Al-Anon?
Oh,
It's
but
not
it could've-
considered, is that what you mean by trauma bonds?
Well, they could meet around that, around having an addict spouse and bond over that. Now the question is, do they go back into the same codependent relationship
With this new
with
person.
each other, which then becomes like a trauma bond and they play through it, or do they take this experience and program and start to do things differently?
Okay.